Okay, let's dive into books purchased in the month of January 2024. Okay, so there's not as many. There's not a lot. If you're like, oh no, is this going to be another 200 or 2 hour, 300 book mega haul extravaganza? It's not. I'm going back to just buying one book every Wednesday, which is a pretty good pace, I think, in general. But last year, 2023, was a big book like buying year for me. I mean, I bought books. I bought a lot of books. You saw a bunch of them here, actually, on these long book haul videos. So we're toning things down a smidge, or like more than a smidge, for 2024. We'll see how long that lasts, but let's go anyway. But of course, I did buy books in January of 2024. This is our month and wrap up, so let's do this. What did I buy? First thing I bought this year was Agua Viva by Clarice Lispector. I've also already read this book, which is not that difficult to imagine it being really, really, really skinny little book. So you'll see this again when in the next segment when we talk about books read in 2024. Agua Viva by Clarice Lispector. Okay. Second book bought, kind of chosen more or less at random, but then not really. Was this recommended? I don't remember. Somebody on BookTube held this up and said, "Oh, I bought this. I don't think they've read it yet." Numenon by Marina J. Lostetter. This is from Harper, I think. Yeah, Harper Voyager. I'm always a sucker for a good generation ship story, from Orphans of the Sky by Robert Heinlein, like way, way back in the day that I read and loved that book. I understand it doesn't hold up, but not all of them do. But anyway, this is a new look at that. Also a big fan of the Jacob's Ladder series by Elizabeth Bear. If you haven't read those, super recommended. And Hull's, I think I want to say it's Hull 03 by Greg Bear, but generation ships, yes, right? So looking forward to this one. And then so I buy a book every Wednesday, usually from Amazon. Not always, but usually from Amazon, because I have this giant wish list there that is just put together from years and years of just hearing about a book here or there, remembering that, getting one book and wanting to fill out the collection, which we'll see some of as well here today. And then they just go onto that list, and then new books go on top of that list, and on top of that list, and on top of that list. So every once in a while, what I do is I just kind of close my eyes and just flip through this thing, and it's page after endless page after page after page. I don't know exactly how many books are on that list, but really a lot. And then I just kind of go, okay, this one. And I did that a couple of weeks ago, and I got Gentleman Overboard, yeah, by Herbert Clyde Lewis, an author I had never heard of, and a book that I have no recollection of how this came to me. I don't know who recommended this to me. Where did I hear of this? Did I see it out there on the internet somewhere? BookTube? I honestly have no idea. But when I hit buy, basically, or put in cart or whatever, I didn't even know what it was. I just trusted my past self that at some point this seemed interesting enough to me to put that on that list. As you'll see, I've already started reading it, bookmark there, and loving it, right? So I don't know. I'm going to probably finish this up in the next couple days because it is really, really short. It's just going to be a matter of, I'm holding it up right now. It's only going to be a matter of how much time do I have to read? This will get polished off soon because, again, I've read the first third of it, and it's really, really good. It's just really, really beautifully written. Where did this come to me? How did this come to my attention? I have no idea. The book itself is absolutely gorgeous. Recovered Books is the imprint. Really nice, right, 4/4 kind of cover with the French flaps, and they're indeed called French flaps. There's introductory material and stuff that I never read the introduction to a novel that I've never read before, first because I've read them before and it's just spoiler-rich environment. So I haven't read any of the rest of the material about the author and why this book disappeared for years and years. It was written in the late 30s, I think. I want to say 1937, something like that. And then it sort of dropped off the face of the earth until it was recovered by Recovered Books. So again, about a third of the way through, and it's really good. So hopefully from what I hear, it kind of goes into weird places. I'm very excited to see. But Gentlemen Overboard by Herbert Clyde Lewis, purchased in January, and actually already started to read it. Because that's another thing I'm trying to break through, which is the buy a book and go like, oh yeah, this book, oh, I'm so excited about that. And then, oh, very carefully put it on the shelf. And then, oh, never read it. Or there it is, it literally sits there I have books that I bought and I never buy a book that I don't intend to read. Okay. So I really thought, I want this book. I'm going to read this book. It goes on the shelf and there it sits in some cases for decades. I have books literally that I have been holding on to for 30 years, 35 years. So the fact that I bought this, not only that, and also Agua Viva by Clarice Lispector that I've already finished. This will be finished in a couple days. Bought books in the month of January and actually read or started to read them in that same month. What a record. So this is also, this one section here, books purchased, is really books delivered or books that came into my possession in the month of January. This one I pre-ordered, I don't know how many months ago. You may have seen the shorts that I've put both of these on the shorts. This is, I'm going to do the glare situation because then you can see that cool gold foil cover. Richard Corbin's Den. This is volume 2. Yes, of course, I have number 1. And I have the next 2 volumes on pre-order waiting from Amazon. Those should come, I think, in the spring and fall. I won't flip this open because there might be private parts and stuff in there. The Heavy Metal magazine masterpieces. There's something about Richard Corbin's perfectly unique style. This soft, smooth, almost kind of look like ceramic figurines engaged in like crazy hard-edged sword and sorcery action adventure. Just super cool, and kudos to Dark Horse for getting these out in these very, very handsome volumes with the dust jacket and everything looking really, really cool. Very excited that showed up. It came in apparently early. I don't know. It was here, and I was happy to get it. Last book that will have arrived in January is, what's that? Blades of Mars by Edward P. Bradbury. If you've seen one of the early book haul videos, you saw me. I thought I had a copy of it here. I'm going to make noises and problems. This book showed up in one of those book hauls, one of those lots of random eBay books. Warriors of Mars by Edward P. Bradbury, who is actually Michael Moorcock. And I saw that and I was like, oh, I remember hearing about this. Yes, I know this. This is a thing. And it turns out there were 3 of them. Warriors of Mars, Blades of Mars, and Barbarians of Mars, which I have on order already. It should arrive in the next, couple, 2-3 weeks. Because another thing I'm trying to do with book buying is buy some of the random books like I did with Gentlemen Overboard. Buy some books that came highly recommended, like the Clarice Lispector book. But then also be good about finishing out these series that I have been waiting for. And look how cool that is, right? Definitely John Carter of Mars pastiche. But you had me a giant spider. You will always have me a giant spider. Giant spiders for the monster win. All right, everybody. That's it. That's not that much. I mean, it's not a box of 200 books. It's not a box of 50 books. It was 1 book a week plus the pre-ordered Richard Corbin collection. January 2024. Next up, books read. he's back with books read in January of 2024. Okay, so these are at least books that were finished in January 2024. Not all of these I started and finished in the same month. I got busy stuff going on. It's not all reading. I want to read more. But there are 5 books here. And for me, that's actually kind of a lot in one month. They're shorter books, which will be an explanation for that. But anyway, in order, what I finished reading in January of 2024, starting with Altered States by Paddy Chayefsky. Have you seen the movie? I think if you're around my generation, you definitely saw the movie. I saw it in the theater when it first came out and I just loved it. It was like this mind-blowing, super cool, next level science fiction movie, yes, but not in that sort of spaceships and Star Wars kind of thing. If you're not familiar with the story, I can't, it's hard for me to believe. It began as the book, obviously, and then was adapted into the movie, so this isn't a novelization. There is a scientist named Jessup who starts to kind of fiddle around with these sensory deprivation tanks that he's got, or him and a partner are doing experiments about using these sensory deprivation tanks. And they're also fascinated by kind of psychedelic chemicals and how could those be used medicinally and how could those be used therapeutically. And again, these are scientists, these are well-known doctors. At some point, he's actually on the faculty of Harvard University, which is where he meets his wife, who's a sort of research biologist. And somehow they come across this psychedelic drug, this natural kind of psychedelic, somewhere in Mexico. And they sort of talk, and he goes down there and he takes this stuff and has this crazy experience, hallucinating and everything. And the idea there, they say that everyone who takes this drug has the same experience. So this is weird. And they get some of the drug and they bring it home. They figure out how to synthesize it. And then they just get this idea, well, what if we took some of that and then got in the sensory deprivation tank so that we turned off all outside stimuli and just let our brains go where? Because the theory was the only way that everyone can have the same, sort of psychedelic or hallucinatory experience is this is somehow tied back to the original consciousness, the sort of hive mind or the proto-mind. And I'm not going to spoil it for you. So that's what they do. They take this drug, or he takes this drug, Jessup, goes into the sensory deprivation tank. It gets weird. He does it again, it gets weirder. He does it again, and it gets crazy weird. Like crazy, crazy weird. This book, for some people, right, I think if you are one of those people who are doing, writing videos about, oh, show, don't tell is bad, and we should tell and not show, this will be the book that you'll want to hold up as an example. It's very short, but it's very, very telly. It's very pulled back. It's this kind of omniscient narrator, which is generally something that I'm not a big fan of, and I know that the sort of American popular publishing business is not a big fan of either. But in this case, right, and again, all rules are made to be broken. That's not a rule, that's a trend, that's a suggestion, show, don't tell. It's 99% what you want to do, and there's a lot of that in here as well. I don't want to make it sound as like this is sort of a research paper or some kind of piece of journalism, an article or something. But it's kind of in a way presented like that. There's a lot of science in here. There's a lot of scientific terminology, a lot of acknowledgments to real scientists and doctors who helped him with this. So in this case, right, because this is meant to read a little bit like this medical report, like a research paper, that really works. And I think so there is an example of, and we will talk about this in future videos, where it's not all just never actually tell anybody what's going on and just make it this nebulous series of images that you hope everyone will carry along with you. That's not what anybody who knows what they're talking about is actually saying. So this book will read a little bit telly, but it works for this very specific book. These characters doing this thing in this place and time, right? So again, fiction is not about following some lockstep set of rules or formulas. It's about presenting the story in exactly the right way for exactly that story. Yeah. Altered States by Patty Chayefsky. Great movie. The movie sticks pretty closely to the book, actually, which surprised me because I remember hearing that Patty Chayefsky was kind of angry about the movie, didn't like it. And one of the reasons that this might be a little bit hard to find, this book, and I ran across it in a used bookstore. This is an older book club edition. And was just like, oh, and saw it and just grabbed it and was like, this is mine. It's got condition issues. Booksellers, opening boxes that contain books. Careful with those. With those razor blades. Look at that. It's just a perfect slice right through the front cover. But again, the interior perfectly great and readable. Spine's in good shape. Just that slice and then some age. And it's otherwise in terrific shape. Book club edition. If you can find this out there, immediately buy it. Immediately read it. Look for the movie on whatever streaming services. It'll probably be out there somewhere. Altered States, 100% a winner. 2 thumbs up for the first book finished in January 2024. Number 2, it's back again, It's Agua Viva by Clarice Lispector. I think I picked this one up mostly on the recommendation of the booktuber Bibliosophie, who really, has done full videos about Clarice Lispector. And she's definitely getting the author, Clarice Lispector, is starting to get some, traction, a little bit of a rediscovery. I liked it. It's very short, and it's very much a stream of consciousness kind of writing. This is not a traditional novel in that sort of, there kind of was no sense of a 3-act structure. Dialogue was kind of all internal. Basically everything was internal. So in the introductory material and the other stuff, which of course I read only after reading the book itself, they talked about how this is a plotless novel, and the author wasn't sure if that's something that could be pulled off, and I'm sure that that's not something that has ever been pulled off, because if it's plotless, it's not a novel. And I'll leave a link below to a blog post about really what I think is the myth of the plotless novel. Now, that said, this is not the same kind of plot that you would find in something by like James Patterson, right? And that's what people tend to mean when they say, it's very plot-oriented or plot-driven narrative. I get it, right? There's no chain of causality, sort of, you have to have a flowchart to figure it out, complicated Dune / Game of Thrones kind of thing going on at all. It is an internal dialogue, but it does actually have, I just said it has no beginning, middle, and end. It doesn't have like, okay, everybody, that was the end of Act 1, and now the character is really in trouble, and there's going to be all these setbacks, and then she'll figure out how to get out of this in the end, I'm sure. It definitely starts someplace. It goes in a cloud more than some kind of a straight line. It's not on tracks. But then it gets to somewhere that's really, really fascinating. It's reminiscent for me because, back in the day, and I don't know, at some point, any time now, I might still read more William S. Burroughs. So in this kind of thing, I tend toward him. But that might just be my white American perspective coming in. And I'll own that, right? But I really engaged with this completely, and I really liked it. And I made little notes, and I pulled out little quotes. And that's not something I do with books that I'm just kind of like, nah, yeah, okay, I get it. It's like fancy books for fancy, smarty people. I think it was really, it was confusing in a way that I really liked. Can you like being confused? I can. And I think there's tremendous strength in the stream of consciousness to just start typing and go. But in order to do that, you have to be at least Clarice Lispector smart. And that bar is raised really, really high. So, stream of consciousness, kind of non-traditional narrative novel, I'm in. But good luck, because it ain't easy. She did it. Agua Viva by Clarice Lispector. Bought and read in the same month. I know that for everybody else watching this is like, what? That's how you do it, right? It's like, not me, man. Not me. Books have to sit on my shelf and percolate for at least 15 years. That's not necessarily always true. Third book finished inside of the month of January 2024. I'm going to always pronounce this a little bit different or wrong, and it doesn't matter because it's just so much fun. The Tar Ain Crane by Alan Dean Foster. I'm a total Alan Dean Foster fan. There's nothing he's ever written that I just didn't have a ball with. This is the first/second book in the Pip and Flink series. It was the first one written, and originally published in 1972. This is a much later. I don't know when. Anyway, much later. Looks like probably 80s, 90s. Daryl K. Sweet cover edition of this. Before I started reading these, I kind of looked around for how long is the series, or where do you start the series, which is the first one, because it doesn't really say always, right? This edition does say the first adventure, right? This is the first one written. But in all that sort of research of like 10 minutes on the internet, 10 minutes or less, there seemed to be a semi-consensus, at least, that really what you want to read first is For Love of Mother Not, which I did. I actually had this. It was in the random pile of books, and it just came up at random. And I had put it in there having heard that this, though it is, I think, the fifth book that was actually written, is a prequel. And it really reads like the first book in the series. And so I went that way. And I got to tell you, that would be my recommendation. Read For Love of Mother Not first, and then The Tar Ain Crane, and then the rest of the series, which you can't see. It's in the shelf above where it's off camera. What is this? Pure space opera, and I know I just did a video saying there's no such thing as science fiction subgenres. But this is space opera in, I think, really that original sense of the term. Just fun stuff, action, adventure with spaceships, aliens, weird planets, and all sorts of stuff going on. And one thing that I found interesting about this, or it was kind of rebranded later as the first book in the Pip and Flink series. Pip and Flinks are actually kind of secondary characters in this. They really feel that way to me. And I was kind of surprised, having read their origin story and then go immediately into this, which follows directly in time. And they're kind of part of an ensemble cast. But this 1972 fun space opera thing, it's amazing how well it holds up. There's a little bit of older gendery stuff that I think we can, I don't know, it didn't really stick in my craw at all. But you can definitely see how this would have inspired stuff like the Traveller RPG or Star Wars coming out in 1972. That this was pure sci-fi action adventure. Super recommended. It really does hold up in all of these 50 now 4 years. Wow. It really feels much, much, much more contemporary than that. Really, really terrifically fun. For people who just like sci-fi, adventure, action, Alan Dean Foster for the win. Number 3, January 2024. A lot of different, there's a bit of a variety in here, but this is kind of interesting to me. Another book upon which a movie was based. First we had Altered States, and now the movie was Hellraiser. The book is The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. I had kind of a semi-overload of science fiction and thought, you know what, I'm in the mood for a little horror. How about that? I bought this, I don't know how long ago, not super long ago, maybe less than a year. And it sat on the shelf, and I was like, why am I not reading that? Why have I never read that? Which is, right, first of all, I like Clive Barker. I can't say that I loved the movie when it came out. And, you know, the old saw is the book is better, because most of the time that's true, and in this case, it is true. The book is better. The movie was a little 80s clunky, you know. And then the second movie was actually better than the first movie, and then from there it just turned into like, what are you even doing? Why is this happening? I understand that you like this Pinhead guy. Let's just beat the crap out of him forever and ever. But this book is just, it's very similar to the movie, right? But reading it, it was still really creepy and really surprising and scary, even having seen the movie and having a sense of what's going to happen. But then I kept thinking, how different is it going to be? I remember the movie did this, and then it was a little bit like that. There was kind of slightly different relationships, and there was a little bit more, but it's still really, and talk about short books, right? It looks like a skinny little book, and then you open it up and it's like, oh, large print for the blind. Which I appreciate. I still wear my reading glasses just for the sake of precision. But it's a novella. It had always been published as, you know, in a collection of stories by Clive Barker. But of course, with the famous movie franchise, now you can buy it as a book, and it's just a really nice, comfortable read. Super creepy. Super creepy. Does leave me with the question, was my imagination overly influenced by the movie? Maybe. Was that also true of Altered States? I think so. Because I always saw Jessup as, right, everybody in the movie as the actors, or everyone, and every character in the book looked like the actors. See, now I'm just conflating them all in my head, and I can't. And so maybe no one really can. If you've seen the movie, I think you'll like the book better. If you saw the movie and didn't like the movie, you will like the book. If you like horror, supernatural horror, for sure. The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker, read pretty quickly, obviously, in the month of January of 2024. Last one. So for years and years, I actually read this book first time in 2010. Recommended it on the blog. It was part of one of the first of the Books for Fantasy Authors series of posts on Fantasy Authors Handbook. And always thought of it as, this is just my favorite. If anybody had asked me, what's your favorite book on the art and craft of writing, it would be this one, Take Joy by Jane Yolen. It can be a little bit hard to see the subtitles there, very subtle. Really neat, kind of strange. I don't know the watermelon and stuff, but fun. And I really rarely reread books. It's very, very rare. But it came up on my Goodreads group, the Fantasy Authors Handbook Goodreads group, which you can join, and you must join. You have no choice but to join. It's free. Why are you not there? This was our first ever group read on that group for January of this year, 2024. I just finished it a couple days ago. And just this time, I kind of wrote all over it. There's notations and things and stuff underlined, and you know, whole paragraphs surrounded by boxes and things like that. And I just pulled out quote after quote after quote after quote that I keep in a file that I then use as examples on the blog, here on the channel, wherever I'm writing about writing, which is all over the place, social media, etc. Here's 3 things, right, that I just pulled out, like at random, that you will find inside of Take Joy by Jane Yolen. She said, I contend it is not the writing that makes writers miserable, it is the emphasis on publication. Remember, she's telling us to take joy in actually writing and let the hard stuff, the business stuff, roll off a little bit and concentrate on that, right? The process, not the product, which is her quote in here as well. She said, interesting anecdotes are not fiction by themselves. They need the sandpaper touch of art, right? Go beyond the idea, the clever little punchline or something like that, and make it something worth reading. And I love this quote. You wouldn't think that I would, being who I am and what I do really for a living. She said, never take any writing teacher's advice as gospel. And she's 100% right. And this absolutely goes for me. We've even seen just recently in the video about adverbs, this nonsense about you can only have one adverb per 300 words. It came from this, what the hell are you talking about? So that's a writing teacher. They were putting themselves forward as, we're going to help you make your writing better by having some kind of weird formula for the number of different words. Crazy, right? So out there, especially now, on YouTube and the blogosphere, everywhere around social media, you see nothing but it's like a torrent of writing advice. This is the rule. You can't use that rule. Like I talked about, it's show versus show, don't tell is what everybody's saying. So I'm going to get more clicks by saying, no, they're wrong. It's tell, don't show. Like, okay. Right? Never take any writing teacher's advice as gospel. Says Jane Yolen in Take Joy. Says Me Too. And you know what? I think there's a whole video from me coming soon about what to do with all this writing advice, including writing advice from me when it comes to creative writing. And this is about creative writing. Novels, poetry, short stories, plays, etc. all covered in here because Jane Yolen has written all of that stuff. Books for adults, books for children, right? Take Joy. You gotta read it. It is shocking. I was shocked to find out when I started rereading this, and when we started, it was nominated and we were voting on what book to read for the group, that it's out of print. It's still out there. You can find it, and it looks like you can find used copies on the cheap. Hey, publishers, don't let this sit there. This is an essential book for every writer's bookshelf. Get this to them. Get one for yourself. Read this. Okay? And that was it. Look at that. Ooh, I'm looking at my stack over here. 5 books. All of which were really short. Read in January of 2024. I feel good about myself. I enjoyed all 5 of these. And all 5 were really quite different. Altered States and Hellbound Heart were a little bit similar in some ways, but not really even. There was some variety there. And this is it, right? Variety is the spice of life. Hey, if you're a writer, you have to be a reader too. You have to be a reader. Keep reading, don't stop reading, and read across genres, across categories. Soak it all in. See words on the page. See how they sit next to each other. See how that feels coming from the page into your head, right? Every single book, all of these, not just the one that is clearly meant to be, hey, here's some things that you should learn if you want to be a writer of fiction. All of these are lessons, right? This is a classroom, this is a classroom, this is a classroom, this is a classroom, this is a classroom. Even if you're not writing kind of philosophical science fiction, even if you're not writing, the stream of consciousness narrative, even if you're not writing really traditional sci-fi action adventure, even if you're not writing supernatural horror. All of these are lessons. Every single word is a lesson, even if it's what not to do. Yeah? So read. 5 books, read by me. I'm so proud. I'm just so proud. And now, you know what? I'm going to be back to show you what I'm reading now because, of course, the reading never stops. And he's back. For books that I'm reading right now. I'm always reading. Remember what I just said? You always have to be reading, always be reading, and try to read a variety of stuff. I make it actually an intentional practice, if I can use that term, to read as much different stuff as I can. Now, obviously, I'm a big fan of fantasy, science fiction, horror, so there's just pretty much always going to be some of that in there. And you saw in the 5 books that I've read already so far, really it's 2 science fiction novels and a horror novel. So, yes, I mean, have the thing that you love the most. I'm not saying, oh, if you love fantasy, you can never read fantasy. That's stupid. Read read whatever you like, and certainly read in the genre that you're writing in. But again, right, and also, not instead of, ever, but and also, what else, right? So I have fiddled with this sort of scheme now for years and years and years, 15, 20 years. And it changes, right? I modify things. I'll leave a link below to issues that I had with my 2023 Goodreads challenge of I was going to read 12 really long books, and I still have some of them lined up right here behind me that you can see here. And it was just kind of a semi-disaster. It was a bit of a disaster. I didn't read 12 long books. I read 12 really long books, and then 40 or 37 whatever other books, many of which were much shorter. So I think I've got this thing down to where it's always worked for me, and I have 5 books going at any given time. And okay, there's a little bit of this. I am an editor. I have to have an organized mind to do that job. So there's a little bit of that organized mind at work here, even while I've just said, read whatever you want. Read whatever you want. But I read whatever I want within a framework. Because this is me, right? I'm not saying this is how you do it. This is not a reading rule, right? I'm not saying that you can't be as smart as I am unless you do that. You can't be as smart as me anyway. There's nothing you can do. So I start with primary fiction. Primary fiction. What does that mean? That's just fiction in any genre that I'm reading just because I want to. The criteria stops there. It's a novel. What's the genre? It could be anything. Is it old? Is it new? Is it short? Is it long? Well, it's not super long. It could be super short. There's another category for super long. Whatever. A novel that I'm reading because I want to. And in this case, you saw it already. It is Gentlemen Overboard by Herbert Clyde Lewis, which we just saw. And so this novel is written in the late 30s. A gentleman, a guy, right? Fairly, successful kind of upper class guy, gets on a ship in Honolulu to sail back home to New York through the Panama Canal. And at some point this is chapter 1, so no spoilers, right? At some point during that voyage, out in literally the middle of the Pacific Ocean, he decides, I want to go see the sunrise. And he sort of leans out of this kind of hatchway in the ship that the crew used to throw garbage out. And he's kind of looking up at the sunset and, the grandeur of the mighty Pacific and all that kind of stuff. And then he goes to turn and his foot slips and he kind of, like that, splash into the water. And, kind of swims out of this big vortex and then realizes, I'm overboard. I'm a gentleman. Overboard. Right? And it goes from there. I've only read the first third. I'm loving every second of it so far. I will finish this in the next couple days. But primary fiction could be anything in this case. Kind of a lost short novel from the 30s that so far really, really good. Just begins with an untenable predicament. Let's see where that heads. Primary fiction, Gentlemen Overboard. Primary nonfiction. I like nonfiction in various and sundry categories. You saw in the books that I finished, obviously, Take Joy, which is a nonfiction book about the art and craft of writing. I read, some number of those all the time. We're all along. I'm always learning. The gray in the beard means yes, some experience, but no. Oh, we never stop learning. We do not stop learning. Primary nonfiction. This was the one, not read with the Goodreads group. This was just, I found it interesting. This was another one that there were booktubers. I want to say Books and Bones. What's that guy? I'll put it down here. Read this and recommended it. So I ordered it. I bought it in hardcover. What We Owe the Future by William McCaskill. So the idea behind this is like, hey, everybody, the world doesn't come to an end when we die. We are not the last generation on Earth. And I know that everybody, I'm not going to say the B word because it has become the N word of ageism. And if you're throwing that around, now you've been told. Anyway, What We Owe the Future. Hey, let's start thinking about maybe not blowing the planet up completely in the next 2-3 years. That's sort of what I thought this was going in, and that's not what it is. I'm about halfway through. Maybe a little bit more than halfway through because there's a lot of like notes and indexy kind of stuff in the end. Nicely researched. So again, halfway through, I'm not leaving a review for a book that I haven't read. I have some feelings. I have some disappointments and some confusions. But he's also not wrong. And then he seems to be wrong. And then he says, oh yeah, but then there's this that makes him not wrong anymore. Interesting. And that's the thing. All it has to be is interesting. But I guess right now I'm in the part where he's basically saying, here's the list of the ways in which we're all going to die. And, I get it, right? And, civilization is hanging on by a thread, he says, and then says, well, but not really. I mean, if you look back into all of human history, it turns out that civilizations do come and go, but the entire global civilization trudges on. And not even trudges on, but progresses on. So, interesting. I don't know. I'm waiting for him to tell me what I owe the future. And besides the obvious of just like, don't do any more harm than you possibly can just by being a human in the world, right? So reserving judgment until I'm done actually reading it. Interesting, right? There's a lot in here. And I have feelings, but that's what books are supposed to do. Give you feelings about things. Next category, random paperback. I've been talking about, through these book haul videos, the random paperback shelf. About more than 400 mass market paperbacks that I have collected up over the years, almost entirely from used bookstores for pennies on the dollar. And just going through these periods, and again, you saw these book hauls just even in the last year or in the last few months, where I'm buying them in huge quantities and stuff. I have started to slow that down. You saw the books that I bought in January so far, and none of them were a giant box of sci-fi or fantasy paperbacks. Because I got 430 or something of them already, just sitting in stacks. But what I do is I read one, right? And then when I'm done with that one, I have them in stacks. There are 10 different stacks. And I just randomly generate, like I literally, hey gamers, I like roll a D10, that stack. I roll a D20, and then I roll a 6-sided die, right? Even on the 6-sided die means I count up, odd, I count down, and the 20 tells me which book, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And I pull out this book blindly, and I read it. And the book that I have just recently pulled out blindly, by random die roll, is Starbridge, as you can tell by reading the cover. Thanks, Phil. By Jack Williamson and James E. Gunn. Book from the mid-50s. This edition is obviously much later. Looks like it was read. I just love old books. I'm going to do the book holly kind of things, right? What happened here? Can you see that? I think whoever read this at some point was like, oh, oh, this is so exciting. I have to obsessively pick at the side of the thing. Okay, well, whatever. It's okay. I kind of slowly working my way through this. So far, so good. It starts out like a Western, like it's kind of a Western, but then it gets weird. And it's obvious that it's a science fiction book right away. The cover is... What? The cover is... One of my dogs has opinions about the cover. Never heard of this book before. This is like the sci-fi version of Gentleman Overboard, but obviously I know the authors. Just came up at random. I dived right in, and so far, so good. Like, it's actually really good. It's better than the cover might lead you to believe. A little bit, very, very kind of action-oriented, but still very thinky. So maybe a little bit more intellectual than the Alan Dean Foster book, but still good, just sci-fi, super goodness. I probably paid 50 cents for this book, and it's just terrific. Starbridge by Jack Williamson and James E. Gunn. All right, remember I said that in 2023 I failed at reading 12 long books, one per month, and ended up reading one long book in February of 2023. That was The Essential Ellison, which I read voraciously because it's Harlan Ellison and he's just that good. And the other one was War and Peace, which I just can't. That was a book that I was supposed to read in January of 2023, and I started it right on January 1st because I'm going to do this thing, damn it. And I finished it somewhere around the middle of November. Now, not so semi-undaunted. I have an issue with reading too many really short books. You saw the books that I finished this month, and they were all really, really short. In some cases, really not even novels at all, right? Like The Hellbound Heart is kind of a novella-ish or novelette, really. So I like short books. I do. It's okay, right? You can like short books. You can like long books. And I've said before that, I really don't like long books except for all the long books that I really like. So I don't actually have that bias, but I do have a little bit of an intimidation factor where I see a bigger book on the shelf and I think, One of the things that I really wanted to do coming into this year was to not be scared off by my terrible, awful, traumatic experience with War and Peace. I didn't want that to spoil me for longer books. Because again, there's the list of all this Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell or Dune, etc. Long books that I've just loved. So I decided, why don't we do this, right? Add into the rotation. We have the primary fiction book, the primary nonfiction book, and the random book that we've seen already. Put in a category of a long book or a short series. And so I'm opening this up and giving myself some more freedom to say either it is a book that's really long or it's like a trilogy. And then I'm going to read the whole trilogy back to back. But that's going to be my long book that will move through as long as it takes me to read it without the pressure of I have to read one every month or any of that. What I said, if you're writing, read as much as you can. Not some fixed number, right? I put another 52 book challenge up on Goodreads at the beginning of this year, and then also wrote a blog post that basically says, if I don't get there, I don't care, and neither should you, right? If I read more than 52, I'm not some kind of special person who deserves a trophy or whatever. Right? It's just sort of like, I'm going to throw that out there as kind of a goal-ish, right? And technically I'm one book ahead already, so I am super awesome and great. But how long will it take me to read this entire series? Yeah, Gene Wolfe. This is Shadow and Claw. So I know, right? Really, Phil? How have you not read The Book of the New Sun, which is a series of 4 books by Gene Wolfe? It's really 5 books, right? The hell are you doing with your life, right? How are you a science fiction fantasy fan and have never read this? I don't know. I don't know. But I definitely felt the gap, and this is a book that, or a series that everybody talks about as being one of the greatest of all time, like one of the uber classics of the genre. I'm so barely scratched the surface so far with this. I've read only the first 3 chapters of the first books. There are 2, the first book, there are 2 in here, which are Shadow of the Torturer. Is that right? I can't see very well. Yeah, the first 2 books. Come on, really? I'll trim this out so that I don't look like a complete idiot. Or maybe I'll just leave that in because what the hell? This is Shadow of the Torturer and The Claw of the Conciliator. I have the other 2. It's hard to point and see yourself on a camera. Kind of right here, right in front of Antkind by Charlie Kaufman, which is not necessarily the next long book I'm going to read, but maybe it will. I don't know that I'm going to read all these in this order exactly. This guy right here is Samuel Beckett. What's up, Sammy? But this is the thing, right? Unless this all of a sudden turns into something terrible, which I know it's not going to be, I feel pretty confident that it is actually good. So far, it's great. So I'll just continue reading this for however long it takes me to read these first 2 books in one, and then the next volume, and then the 3rd volume, in order like that, right? So instead of reading War and Peace, I'm going to read this. I already like it. Immediately, I like it way better. But War and Peace set that bar pretty for me. The last of the 5 is the long series. So remember I told you I finished reading the Taurine Crane, which is for me the second in the Pippin Flinks series after For Love of Mother Not. And I intend to read the rest of that series because I had a great time with the first one. I had a great time with the second one. Why would I all of a sudden stop having a good time with the rest? Don't have them all. Again, they're on the shelf. Oh, you can't see. But I've got other long series or collections of books. Over this shoulder, you can see my ace doubles, right? Right here on this shelf, you can see Doc Savage. Over here, out of camera range, is Tom Swift Jr., Perry Rodan, yes. Downstairs is the Harvard Classic series. I'll get to that. Then Star Trek over here, off camera there, right? And then I went, what was it? I want to say 2020, 21, 22. I started kind of randomly subscribing to literary magazines just to bring that back into my head after a long absence from that world. And this also corresponded with me writing a lot more poetry and short stories and literary stuff. And so I started subscribing to stuff. And so the category for the long series, which isn't a series necessarily because I've actually got a shelf full of literary magazines that are all different. Or, that in some cases were like a 4-issue subscription or a 6-issue subscription interspersed with the other magazines that came in, whatever. What came up on the shelf was the Paris Review issue. Remember, this is going to have some glare issues just from the color of the thing and the bright light of my screens there. I think you can see that. The Paris Review number 239, spring of 2022. So that kind of tells you where I am, like how far behind I am. I'm 2 years behind on the Paris Review. It's okay. It's not a race, right? This isn't, like reading, Time or Newsweek or something like that. This is perennial. These are poems and short stories and other things. Great interviews with authors, by the way. The best interviews with authors you will ever see anywhere have always come from the Paris Review for decades and decades. But I'm working my way through this one also relatively slowly. But I'm there, and I'm just about at the beginning. Speaking of these interviews, right? Here's my. You can see my bookmark from Brick and Mortar Books in Redmond Town Center. What's up, Brick and Mortar Books? Interview with Jamaica Kincaid. I'm in, 100% in on that. Okay, everybody. Obviously, a change of scenery and wardrobe to finish out the January month-end wrap-up for 2024, January 2024. Phil, again, there were some technical issues. It doesn't matter. We're moving right on. Listen, I think what we were talking about before was this idea of the long series. It was part of my reading scheme, or is continues to be part of my reading scheme. What were these series? I started to talk about that. Some whatever technical stuff happened. Doesn't matter. We're pressing on. So I have 8 of these series. They're not all necessarily series. 2 of them are kind of a collection. Let's start with that. Collection Ace Doubles. In the previous video, you can see them behind me. This is the downtown office. They're not here. Anyway, first up, my Ace Double collection, which I love. So making sure that I actually read some of these, because what's the point of collecting them without reading them? Of course. Next up, probably in February, will be this one. How about this? Spaceborne by E.C. Tubb. This is a reason, if nothing else, to collect Ace Doubles is the great, just classic sci-fi cover art. Yeah. But look at this one. Oh, Philip K. Dick. These are the Ace Doubles that are expensive. I don't remember how much I paid for this. I want to say $35. I don't know. I don't really remember. It doesn't matter. The Man Who Japed by Philip K. Dick, Ace Double. Just love the Ace Doubles, right? You understand that. There's a book on this side, and there's another book on this side. Outstanding. So I read an Ace Double as that comes up. And so reading right now or finishing up the Paris Review in the Lit magazine category, the next thing up will be the first of the 8, which is the Ace Doubles. So that's next for February, or yeah, as soon as that Paris Review gets finished, which will be really soon. Next after that is the Tom Swift Jr. series. I've been collecting these just out of sheer, pure nostalgia, recapturing of childhood that happens to you when you're, I don't know, just for some reason. Again, cover art, beautiful, perfect, just space, action, fun, adventure. These are middle grade books in this what's called library bound or paper overboard. I have one that has a dust jacket from an earlier printing. It's hard to get when this book was actually published, because they kind of just have the copyright date. That's a Grosset and Dunlap thing that, makes those books sometimes really difficult to date. I think you have to go by how many of the series was actually included on the list in the back. So this is the next one up. This is number 6. Tom Swift and his Outpost in Space. Just for fun, man. Like, why not, right? Has the end paper kind of thing happening here. Illustrations inside. Can we find one? No, that's weird. I can't find any illustrations in this one. It doesn't matter. Tom Swift, boy inventor. Super formulaic and goofy. But just, for the inner child. Then, in a cycle, right, a regular cycle, Perry Rhodan. We've talked about Perry Rhodan before. I will be up to number 3. I've read the first 2 already. Used some just recently in the adverbs video, just for, just sort of pulling random examples out, and why not? Not super well written. Translations maybe a smidge literal. Don't know. These were originally in German. Perry Rhodan, I believe, is still going in Germany, the longest running science fiction series, or probably any sort of fiction series anywhere. Just fun space opera stuff again, action adventure. These early ones from these would be from the late '60s, really. Very Cold War-y, right? This begins with just sort of a Cold War sensibility, and then some aliens, and it gets weird and it gets fun. This is number 3. What's it called? Galactic Alarm. Why not? Right? I can't not collect these. They're all numbered perfectly and just, oh, it's great. Then, after the next Perry Rodan book, number 3 comes up, then is the next Doc Savage book, which is number 4, The Polar Treasure. Look at that Doc versus the giant polar bear. What's not to love? Speaking of badly written, but wow, just a lot of lessons to be gleaned from these, actually, for authors. In a lot of cases, honestly, what not to do. The writing in these was definitely, clearly, and almost excruciatingly padded. This was a guy, his name was Lester Dent. There were other authors, but mostly Lester Dent writing as Kenneth Robeson. I'm not 100% sure if this was one written by Lester Dent or one of the other authors. But it didn't really matter. They were tasked with, because he wrote most of them, writing about a 60,000 word short novel every month. Right? So do NaNoWriMo plus 10,000 words every single month, except you have to be done and it has to be publishable. And you have to just keep doing that month after month after month after month. So is this padded? Is he doing everything possible to stretch to get to that word count? Yup. Which means he's doing pretty much everything that contemporary writing teachers or editors like me are telling you not to do. Using 10 words when 3 would suffice. So again, these are just, for me, these are just fun. They're just fun to have. That's a fascinating part of the history of genre fiction, and a wealth of examples of what not to do and how you can fix bloated writing, how you can, right, really actually dig into characters instead of just kind of saying, and here's Doc Savage, and he's just this great, perfect, awesome guy who is basically foolproof, bulletproof, essentially, and then he's got this weird group of dudes who help him, who all have their different areas of expertise, but nobody, so far in the series at least, has kind of come alive. But now it sounds like this is terrible, don't read it. But honestly, it is kind of terrible. And don't read it unless, like me, you're reading it for you kind of have an ulterior motive, but also can just kind of turn off that part of your brain that says, I need some kind of literary quality at all, and you can just kind of say, well, that was a hoot, because honestly, so far in the just the scratching the surface that I've done on this series, it's a hoot. I mean, it's just fun. Doc Savage, why not? Taking really kind of a hard turn after that, Harvard Classics, the 5-foot shelf of books. I've read the first one, which was mostly the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, which I found fascinating. You can see them behind me, behind my ukulele there, and then remember I said that last year I kind of bought a lot of books. Well, you can see them stacked up on top of each other back there and stacked up everywhere. It got a little bit like, so we're calming down, right? But in 2018, and I know that for sure, and I'll tell you why, I was at a used bookstore and they had the full 52 volume set of, clearly all in the same edition, the brown, of the Harvard Classic series for $50, and I was just like, sold. They're in actually really pretty good shape for books that are now over 100 years old, and the fact that when I opened the first one up and it has the signature of the original owner from exactly 100 years ago, it was like, there's no way I'm not buying this. So this was just really a great find for me. Now, say what you will about this, right? This is the privileged white guy canon, you know. I don't fall into that trap of these are the only books that you ever need to read, and or you have to read these, or you're just a mouth breathing dumbass. Okay, come on, right? But on the other hand, there's a lot of great stuff in here. There's a lot of history and poetry and a little bit of fiction. There's plays, there's philosophy, there's tremendous content in this. Like I said, I've read the first one, which was sort of focused on early American history. This one is in the lighting. It seems like you can see me, but it's hard for me to see in here. But this one begins with the apology, right, of Plato, the golden savings of Epictetus, and the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, which I've read already. So it goes from early American history, like, hey, everybody, remember that this is Harvard, and it's all about, some of the founding fathers. The editor, I believe, was a Quaker, so the first volume has a lot of Quaker stuff in it. All right. This one goes now back into the classic period, and we start talking to the ancient Greeks, my forefathers. I have fully intend to read all 52 volumes of these, interspersed with Doc Savage and Perry Rodan, because that's the kind of liberal mind I have. Next, of course, Star Trek. And this is a collection, too, more than a series, although I collect a series of series. I think for February, or for the next Star Trek book that comes, it won't be February, but the next Star Trek book that comes around, I'm going to go for the next. This is the last one that I have. I don't know if it was the last one that was published, Volume 4 of these Golden Press collections of Gold Key Star Trek comics, which are so weird and cool and bizarre. As the series progressed, it seemed like the artists and writers were actually seeing episodes of Star Trek, or at least images from Star Trek. The first volume of this was basically science fiction stories with characters that had the name Captain Kirk and Spock and so on, but were not in any way Star Trek stories. They get more Star Trek-y as they go. But just, again, this is not the Harvard Classic series. This is not some kind of super robust storytelling. This is not the Death of a Star. This is not, yeah, you know what this is. Goofy old comic books that were aimed at kids. But I'm a Star Trek fan. I'm a Trekkie like OG Trekkie, really. Like, my entire life has been just being a Star Trek fan. Live long and prosper. This is just cool. I'm so excited that I even own this, let alone get a chance to read it, right? Star Trek is number 6 on the list of series. The next one we just said in the books read this month was The Towering Crane by Alan Dean Foster, the Pip and Flink series. The next one after that will be Blood Hype. This book came in, I think, one of those book hauls. And, ooh, can we see it? Let's just say condition issues. Really, this was book, look at that, oof, ouch. Book plus water equals, oh, not good, not good. But it's all intact, it's all readable, it is what it is. I'm okay, as long as I can read the pages, and here they are, you can see the pages. There's blobs on it, but I can still read it. So, Blood Hype, kind of clunky old Del Rey edition. Cover art that says, like, meh, it's space. There's space stuff going on. It's got rocket ships in it. Like I said, I read the first two are sort of the prequel, and then the first one loved, loved, loved. No reason not to that I won't love also Blood Hype and the rest of this very long series. Actually, I don't own all the series yet, so I'm kind of slowly building this in, but I have enough to keep me going for a while. By the time this cycles all the way back, and then last but not least, the literary magazines that I went on this sort of lit mag subscription frenzy a few years ago, and I'm behind. I'm like sorely behind, but it's okay. We just read because we love, not because there's a race on or we have to get to a certain number, right? We love reading. I subscribe to this, Not One of Us. This will be the next one after the Paris review. This really brings me back to the old zine days. Not One of Us is weird fiction, horror, etc. Tiny little book. You know, this is exactly the kind of thing that my old alternative fiction poetry was, although I had a larger magazine format. Saddle stitched, which is what you call it when it's folded over and then there's staples in between, right? And this is just sort of weird fiction and poetry. Really good stuff. This is just a very, very nicely curated magazine I've read a few issues of so far and really like. So recommended. Hopefully they're still out there, still around. Lit magazines don't always last, unfortunately. Not One of Us. And so that's it, right? Those 8 series or collections that I have either bought into completely or finished. I don't think any of them have finished, but that I'm buying, collecting, and also now working on reading in this cycle that keeps each one fresh and so on. So is this something that you want to think about doing? Are you one of those people where if there's a series like Brandon Sanderson's stuff and you're like, well, that's all I'm going to do until I'm done with that? That would work on my brain. I couldn't live in that universe the way I did for 15 years living in the Forgotten Realms universe. You know, after a while that becomes like, please let me live someplace else for just a minute. And so now my brain needs to sort of refresh and keep things fresh. Yeah. And I think 8 of these is probably too many, but I am getting through these books. But every time one comes up, I'm like, oh yeah, Doc Savage, woo! And I think if I read 5 Doc Savage books in a row, I'd be like, oh, just no more of this, please, no more. But interspersing that with other stuff keeps it at least a little bit fresh. I just want to hit real quick what you saw on the blog this month. And I know you saw it on the blog this month because you're following the blog. You're subscribed to that because it's free and there's no reason not to, because what are you doing? So this month we had Smells Like Vivid Description, because listen, you want to appeal to all 5 senses if you can. So this one is talking about smell. How do you convey that in writing? What can that do for your character's experience, which is really what fiction is all about. Yes, the experience of the point of view character. Next up was Get Thee Behind Me Goals. So touched on that a little bit in this video in terms of that, I went into it with all the best intentions, but that crazy Goodreads challenge that I put myself into in 2023 of reading one really long book every month, and I was going to read 12 long books, and it just immediately became impossible for me. Do you have writing goals that say, I have to write this many words per day? I feel like I have to write every day. I have to finish this. I have to write 5 novels, something like that. Is that actually working for you? First of all, if you're happy with what you're writing, how much of what you're getting done and what that looks like in the end, then go. Don't stop because somebody said, oh, don't have goals. If those goals are actually working and you're happy and things are going your way, then don't mess with success, right? But if you're out there feeling bad about yourself because you're stalled because, you saw a video about what Hemingway did it this way, Ray Bradbury did it that way, this is how David Foster Wallace wrote his books. Fantastic. Those are all significant authors there. That's great. That's them. That's not you. That's not me. Right? So before you trap yourself into this, what is absolutely a myth of this goal-oriented, whatever, atomic habit, let's just say it's out loud nonsense. Read this and maybe allow me to absolve you of all of the stress that we're putting ourselves under for no reason whatsoever. Yeah? Next. Describe characters as you go along. This was really cool and actually was inspired by a story kind of novelette that I read in a very old pulp magazine, which you can get online. There's links to everything. It was really fun, weird sort of detective story. Well, it was a detective story, crime story. And I was struck right away just as I'm reading it, where it begins with these two characters, sort of an insurance investigator, private detective guy, and a beat cop are in this weird neighborhood, and they are having this conversation. They're just meeting each other and kind of feeling each other out. Characters are described, these two characters are described in little bits, a sentence, a piece of a sentence, as this little conversation progresses. So there's no character description info dump. You know that I rail against why do we care what color eyes? Why do we care what color hair? And never ever do we say this person is 5'8" tall, because how do we know that? How does the point of view character know that? And why does the point of view character care exactly how tall somebody is, and so on? So really hit that, especially if you've ever been tagged by an editor, a beta reader, a teacher, somebody for info dumps or character description that goes on and on, paragraph by paragraph, or for more than a couple sentences at a time. You can spread that out and get deliver to your readers a sense of who these characters are, what they look like when it matters, what about them matters to the point of view character, etc., in little pieces as you go. Read that post. Links below. You know how this works. Next up then was a post that was really backing up or more or less repeating the video adverbs are fine, because remember we talked about that. Adverbs are fine. Watch the video, read the post, soak that in, believe that. And then we ended up the month with Take Joy again, which was my reread of, which we just saw, Take Joy by Jane Yolen, and I just basically put in all of the notes, all of the quotes that I pulled out of that book. It will give you a sense of really how positive and supportive that book is. If you are writing, doing any kind of creative writing, fiction, poetry, books for adults, kids, across the entire age spectrum, plays, anything, any sort of creative writing, you need to have that book. You need to read that book just because it says, hey man, love the process, right? Love writing. And then there's all of the publication stuff and the querying and all that stuff that sucks. But love the writing, because that's what you have any control over. Yeah. All we have control over as authors is the quality of our own work. We don't have control over the publishing industry. I sure don't. We don't have any control over the economy that then has an effect on the publishing industry. We don't have any effect on Amazon. And if anyone tells you this is how you manipulate or cheat the Amazon algorithm, hilarious. Absolutely not, right? What do we have control over? The quality of our writing and how we feel while we're actually writing. Take Joy will ground you back in that. Read this book. I swear to God, you got to read this book. Okay, that's it for January 2024. I just dropped my little notes on the floor. I don't need them anymore. I will see you again soon with more writing stuff, and then I'll try to do one of these videos, again, shorter than this one, without all the supporting material and hullabaloo at the end of February. And we're just going to not be goal-seeking creatures. We're going to be joy-seeking creatures for the rest of 2024. And even though I rail against the algorithm dystopia, hit that like button. Subscribe. It's free. There's no Patreon. There's no secret club. There's no money. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button. Share if you feel like you want to. And comment below for any reason whatsoever. And anyway, I'll see you again soon with more Fantasy Authors Handbook on YouTube. And of course, every Tuesday on the blog. See everybody. Keep writing and write with joy.